Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Unsaid Hours. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. The Telltale Heart. You are about to hear a confession, not from a book, not from a made-up character. This is a man speaking directly to you right now in the dark, telling you exactly what he did and exactly why he did it. He wants you to know he is not crazy. That is the most frightening part. Listen carefully. His name does not matter. What matters is the eye. The old man had an eye that was not normal. It was pale blue, almost white, covered with a thin film that caught the light in a wrong way. When that eye looked at you, it did not feel like being seen. It felt like being touched by something cold and dead. The man who tells this story had lived with that eye for a long time, and slowly, quietly, without anyone noticing, the eye had begun to change him. He did not hate the old man. He wants you to understand that. He actually liked the old man. The old man had never done anything wrong to him, had never been cruel, had never even raised his voice. It was only the eye. Just the eye. He said to himself, if I could only get rid of the eye, everything would be fine. If that eye were simply gone from the world, he would be free of the feeling it gave him. The cold, crawling feeling that crept up his back every time the pale eye landed on him. So he made a plan. For 7 nights he came to the old man's door at midnight. Every night, the same thing. He would open the door so slowly, so carefully, that it took him a full hour to open it enough to slip his head inside. He would hold a dark lantern closed tight so no light escaped. And then, one tiny movement at a time, he would open the lantern just enough to let one thin beam fall across the old man's eye. But every night the eye was closed, and without the eye open he felt nothing. The rage that the eye produced in him, that specific crawling cold rage, was simply not there when the eye was closed. The old man was just an old man, asleep in his bed, harmless and small. So he would close the lantern, he would slide back out the door, and he would go back to his own room and wait for the next night. 7 nights. The same thing. 7 times he stood in that doorway with his hand on the lantern and his heart beating very quietly and carefully. And 7 times the eye was closed, and 7 times he went back. On the 8th night, something changed. He was being more careful than usual, even more careful. His hand was steadier, his breathing was slower. He was so quiet that he could hear the wood settling under his feet. He was so quiet that he could hear his own blood moving, and then his thumb slipped on the lantern. Just a little, just enough for one thin line of light to escape and fall directly across the old man's face. The old man sat up in the dark. He said, "Who is there?" No one answered. There was only silence. The man in the doorway did not move. He did not breathe. He stood in the darkness and waited. And the old man sat up in his bed in the darkness and waited. And neither of them made a sound. And the silence between them grew and grew like something alive. Can you imagine that? 2 people in a dark room, both completely still, both listening, both afraid, and neither one knowing exactly what the other one was. That went on for an hour, a full hour of silence. And then the man at the door heard something that stopped his heart for a moment before it started again, too fast, too loud. He heard the old man's heartbeat. It came to him through the darkness like something moving underwater, low and slow at first, steady, then a little faster, then faster still. The sound of a heart that knows something is wrong but cannot see what it is. The sound of fear before fear has a name. And something happened to the man in the doorway when he heard that sound. The crawling feeling came back. worse than it had ever been when he saw the eye. Much worse, because this was not just the eye now. This was the whole old man, the whole living, breathing, frightened old man, and the feeling that rose in the man in the doorway was so large and so hot and so wrong that it blocked out everything else. He threw open the lantern. He crossed the room in 3 steps. The old man had only time to make one sound, one short cry, before it was over. Afterward, he was calm. This is the thing he wants you to understand. Afterward, he was completely calm. His hands were steady. His mind was clear. He was calmer, in fact, than he had been in years, calmer than he had been since the eye first began to bother him. He worked carefully and methodically. He dismantled the bed. He pulled up 3 planks from the wooden floor of the room. He placed what remained of the old man beneath the planks. He replaced the planks perfectly, so perfectly that no human eye could have detected any difference. No stain, no mark, nothing. By the time the gray morning light began to come in through the window, everything was clean. Everything was in order. Everything was exactly as it had always been. He went and sat down. He was satisfied. He felt good. He felt, for the first time in a long time, completely at peace. And then someone knocked at the door. 3 of them, police officers. A neighbor had heard a scream in the night and reported it. They were very polite. They asked if they could look around. He said, "Of course, please look at everything. I have nothing to hide." And he meant it. He showed them every room. He opened every cabinet. He spoke to them easily and comfortably, answering every question with confidence, because he had done everything so carefully and so well that there was truly nothing to find. They sat down in the room with the 3 planks in the floor. He sat down too, and they talked. And he was relaxed, genuinely relaxed, chatting with them the way you chat with people you have nothing to fear from, and everything was fine. Everything was perfectly fine. And then he heard it again. Low at first, like something very far away, a rhythm, a pulse, like a watch ticking inside a wall, except it was not a watch. He knew immediately it was not a watch. He knew exactly what it was and where it was coming from. The heartbeat, coming up through the floor. He kept talking. He kept his face arranged in the right expression. He kept the conversation going, answering questions, asking questions back, acting like a normal person having a normal conversation. But the sound was getting louder. How was it possible that the officers could not hear it? How were they just sitting there, talking calmly, when that sound was filling the room, when it was getting louder by the second, when it was now so loud that he could feel it in his teeth? He talked faster. He talked louder. He stood up and began to pace because the energy building inside him had nowhere to go. The officers did not seem concerned. They were perfectly relaxed. They were still talking, still asking questions, still sitting there as if nothing in the world was wrong. And that was the worst part. That was the part that finally broke him. Because if they could not hear it, if they were simply sitting there calmly while that sound tore through the room like something alive and enormous, then there were only 2 explanations. Either they could hear it and they were pretending they could not, or he was the only one who could hear it. He does not finish the sentence. He does not need to. You already understand what happened next. You already understand what he did, what he said, what he tore up from the floor and threw at the feet of those calm, patient, unsmiling officers. He did it because the sound would not stop. He did it because he could not stand it anymore. He did it to make it stop. It did not stop. End of story 1. Take a breath. Settle deeper into where you are. Let the quiet around you be just quiet. Nothing else. Just the ordinary silence of an ordinary night. Story 2 begins now. There is something important to understand about the man who tells this story. He is not a monster. He does not think of himself as a monster. He thinks of himself as a person who has pushed past a limit, that most people never reach, by something that most people would not understand. And he thinks that if you had been there, if you had seen what he saw every single day, if you had felt what he felt every time that pale eye found him across a room, you would understand. You might even agree with him. This is the most frightening kind of person, not the kind who knows they are wrong, the kind who is absolutely certain they are right. He was careful in a way that most people are not careful about anything. He took pride in his carefulness. He took pride in the fact that every step, every movement, every decision he made in those 7 nights of watching was precise and controlled and left nothing to chance. He was not impulsive. He was not angry. He was methodical, the way a craftsman is methodical, the way a person who takes their work seriously is methodical. The work, in this case, was watching. 7 nights of watching. He would begin his preparations before midnight. He did not rush. Rushing produces errors, and he would not allow errors. He would dress quietly in dark clothing, not because he was skulking or hiding exactly, but because dark clothing is simply more practical for moving through a dark house without producing alarm. He would take the lantern, already prepared, already tested, the shutter mechanism smooth and silent from practice. He would go to the hallway outside the old man's room, and then the waiting would begin. The waiting was the part he liked best, if he is being honest. The standing in the hallway outside the door, perfectly still, perfectly controlled, while inside the room the old man slept his innocent sleep, not knowing, not suspecting, not even dreaming, in all likelihood, of anything darker than the ordinary mild bad dreams that old men have. The contrast pleased him, his complete awareness and complete control on one side of the door, and the old man's complete ignorance on the other. He would stand there for sometimes 20 minutes before he even touched the door handle, just standing, just breathing, just being perfectly ready. Then the handle, 1 millimeter at a time, slower than slow, slower than you would think a person could move and still be moving. A full hour to open the door enough to put his head through. He describes this, and he is proud of it. Even now, even telling you what came after, he is proud of the patience and the precision of those 7 nights. He wants you to be impressed. He wants you to understand that this was not the work of a reckless or uncontrolled person. This was the work of someone who understood exactly what they were doing and did it with complete mastery. He opened the door. He put his head through. He angled the lantern just so and opened it just the amount required, 1 thin beam, and he let it fall toward the eye. The eye was closed. Every night for 7 nights, the eye was closed. He accepted this. He did not get angry. He did not deviate from the plan. He simply closed the lantern and withdrew and went back to his room and waited for the next night, because the plan was right. He knew the plan was right. Eventually the eye would be open, and then everything would proceed. On the 8th night, it rained. A soft rain, the kind that does not announce itself dramatically, but simply begins and continues, steady and quiet. The sound of it against the house was actually useful, he thought. A layer of sound that covered his footsteps in the hall, that gave him one more advantage in an operation that he had already carefully arranged in his favor. He stood outside the door in the rain sound, and he breathed, and he was ready. And then he opened the door. What happened with the lantern? The tiny slip of his thumb, the one small moment of imperfection in 8 nights of perfect work. He replays this sometimes, not with regret about what came after, but with a specific frustration about the imperfection itself. Everything had been so controlled. Everything had been so precise. And then one involuntary movement of one thumb. The light escaped, and the old man woke. "Who is there?" the old man said. He did not answer. Of course he did not answer. Answering would have been absurd. Instead, he stood in the darkness, that was no longer quite as dark as it had been. One thin line of escaped light still finding its way through the not quite closed lantern, and he waited. And the old man sat up in his bed, and he also waited. And the rain continued outside, steady and indifferent. He thinks about that hour sometimes. The full hour of silence between them, with the rain as the only sound, the old man sitting up in his bed in the dark, not knowing what was wrong, but knowing something was. His body telling him what his mind could not confirm, that ancient animal alarm that all living things carry. The alarm that says something is here that should not be here. Something is present in this dark that means you harm. The old man could not see him. He is certain of this. The room was dark enough that he was invisible, just another darkness in a dark room. But the old man could feel him, the way animals feel things they cannot see, the way the body knows before the mind does. He stood in the doorway for an hour, and he felt something new during that hour, something he had not expected. He had expected to feel the familiar cold rage that the eye produced in him. But what he felt instead, in that hour of shared dark and silence and rain, was a kind of terrible tenderness. He was sorry, in some part of himself, that the old man was afraid. He was genuinely sorry. He did not want him to be afraid. He simply could not let the eye continue to exist in the world. These two things were both true at the same time, the sorrow and the intention, the tenderness and what came after. This is what he cannot explain. This is the part where the story becomes truly frightening. Not the thing he did, but the fact that he was kind while he did it. Not in his own telling, not in his self-justification, but genuinely. He held both things at once, the sorrow and the act. He threw open the lantern. He worked through the night, methodically, carefully, with the same precision that had characterized every step of the previous 8 nights. There was no panic, there was no haste. There was just the work, done correctly, done completely, done in a way that left no evidence for any human eye to find. He was good at this. He had not known he would be good at this before he tried, but he was. When the police came in the morning, he was genuinely calm. Genuinely. Not performing calm, not suppressing panic. Actually calm. The deep calm of a person who has done what they intended to do, and done it well, and has nothing to hide because there is nothing to find. He walked them through the house himself. He gestured, he opened doors. He answered questions with the directness and the ease of someone who has nothing to conceal. He was helpful. He was cooperative. He feels certain, exactly what an innocent person looks like. They sat down. In the room. In that particular room. He sat down with them and they talked. And the conversation was easy and comfortable. And he was comfortable, genuinely comfortable, because he had done everything right and there was nothing for them to find. But the sound, that sound, he tries to explain it even now and cannot fully. It began so small, so far away, a suggestion of a rhythm rather than a rhythm itself, a feeling in the air that might have been his imagination. But it grew, and the officers sat and talked and seemed to hear nothing, and he kept talking back at them, kept his voice steady, kept his face arranged correctly, but inside the sound was now enormous, now the only thing in the room, now so loud that he could not understand how 3 other people could be sitting in the same space and not be covering their ears. He talked louder, he talked faster, he stood up and moved because the energy had to go somewhere. He gesticulated. He laughed at things that were not funny. He made every mistake that a person makes when they are pretending to be calm, while something inside them is screaming. And the officers remained perfectly, infuriatingly calm. He looked at their faces. They were not alarmed. They were not suspicious. They were just 3 men sitting in a room having a conversation. But the sound, the sound, the sound. He will tell you the rest himself if you ask. He will tell you what he said and what he did and how it ended. But he will also tell you that he is not sorry. He told them. He is not sorry he showed them where to look. He is not sorry the sound finally stopped. He is only sorry it started again. In his head, in the quiet, in the middle of the night. It never really stopped. There is one more thing he wants to tell you about the old man. The old man trusted him. This is the detail that the man who tells this story returns to most often in the quiet, in the middle of the night, when the sound starts again in his head. Not the eye, not what he did. The trust. The old man had never locked his door. He had never shown any sign of suspicion, never looked at the man who came to his door and saw anything other than what he appeared to be. He had been, in every interaction, warm and open and completely without guile. He trusted him completely, and the man who tells this story had stood in his doorway for 8 nights, watching him sleep in his trust, and had not felt that trust as a reason to stop. He had felt it as something neutral, something simply true about the old man that had no bearing on what needed to happen with the eye. He is still not sure whether this makes things worse or whether it is simply irrelevant. He has thought about it often and cannot decide. Maybe trust is not the point. Maybe trust is just something some people have and some people do not. And whether you have it does not determine what happens to you. Maybe the world is simply not organized according to what people deserve. He believes this now. He did not always believe it. He used to think the world was more organized than that, more responsive to the qualities people brought to it. He knows better now, from experience, that he would not have chosen to have. He sits in his room and the sound comes and goes, and he has learned to wait for it to pass. The way you learn to wait for pain to pass, not because it will stop permanently, but because there are intervals, and in the intervals you can almost feel normal. And normal is something he has decided to be grateful for in small amounts. He did not expect to be caught. This is perhaps the most honest thing he has told you, not because he thought he was invincible, but because he had been so careful, and carefulness, he had believed, was protective. That if you did a thing with enough precision and enough control, the consequences could be managed. What he had not accounted for was his own mind, not the obsession about the eye that he had accounted for and used, but the thing that happened in the room with the officers, the sound that only he could hear rising and rising while 3 men sat and chatted as if the world were entirely ordinary. He had not accounted for that. He had not understood that a mind that can go to the places his mind goes can also betray you in the moment that matters most, can produce from its own guilty interior exactly the thing you most need not to experience. He had not understood that until it was too late. He understands it now. He has a great deal of time to understand things. Story 2, Berenice. Some people are afraid of the dark. Some people are afraid of being alone. Aegeus was afraid of something much stranger than either of those things. He was afraid of ordinary objects, not all of them, just the ones he stared at for too long, and he stared at everything for too long. He had grown up in a house that was very old and very dark, a family house that had been in his family for generations, full of rooms that no one used and corridors that went nowhere useful, and a library that was larger than most churches, full of books that no one had read in decades. He was a quiet child. He did not play outside. He did not have many friends. He lived mostly in his own mind, which was a place of strange depths and sudden drops, a mind that could fix itself on one small thing and follow that thing down and down into a darkness that had no bottom. His doctors had a word for it, a medical word, a word that meant something like becoming completely lost in one single thought, while the whole world continues around you and you do not notice. He would sit in a chair and look at something, a candle flame, a spot on the wall, the corner of a book, and time would simply stop existing for him. He would come back to himself an hour later, or 3 hours later, and not know where he had been. He thought of it as a kind of traveling, a traveling that left his body behind. This is important. Remember this. Berenice was his cousin. She had grown up in the same house. She was everything he was not. Bright and quick and alive, always moving, always laughing, always outside in the sun and the garden, while he sat inside with his books and his long silences. He had never thought of marrying her. She was simply there, part of the house, part of the background of his life, like the old furniture and the smell of old paper. And then she got sick. The sickness changed her completely. Not slowly, but all at once, the way a candle goes out. Not a slow dimming, but a sudden absence of light. She became thin. She became pale. She became quiet in a way that was not like his quiet at all. Not the quiet of a mind turned inward, but the quiet of something essential going out of a person. She developed a condition that affected her mind as well as her body. Seizures of a kind. Moments where she went away, the way he went away when he fixed on things, but longer and deeper, and from which she returned less fully each time. He watched this happen. He felt something for her that he could not name. Something that was part pity and part something else. Something that had no clean word. And then he noticed her teeth. This is the part that is difficult to explain. And he knows it. And he is sorry, but he needs you to understand. It began as just a noticing. Her teeth were very white and very even and very regular. When she smiled, which she still sometimes did even in her illness, they were the most visible thing about her face, bright against the pallor of her skin. He noticed them once, and then he noticed them again. And then his mind, which did this to him, which took one thing and pulled it down into the dark, and would not let it go, fixed on them. Just the teeth. He began to think about them when she was not in the room. He began to see them when he closed his eyes. He began to have the particular kind of obsessive waking dream that his condition produced. The kind where one image fills the entire space of your mind and crowds out everything else. And the image was always her teeth, white and even and somehow horrible to him in a way he could not explain. A way that had nothing to do with them being actually horrible. They were just teeth. He knew they were just teeth. But they were also the only thing in the world. She came to him one evening, moving slowly the way she moved now, and she stood in the library doorway, and the lamplight fell on her face, and she smiled. He looked at her teeth. He stared at them. He went away. He does not know how long he was gone. He came back to himself in the library, alone. The lamp burned very low, the room cold, and the feeling in his mind was the feeling you have after a dream you cannot remember, the feeling that something large has happened in a space you cannot access. He sat in the chair for a long time. A servant came to the door. The servant's face was strange. The servant said something that he heard, but could not immediately process. The words arriving in the wrong order, not making sense at first. Berenice had died. During the night, they had found her. He sat with this information and felt nothing clear. He felt the inside of his mind the way you feel the inside of a room that has been emptied of its furniture. The shape still there, the walls still standing, but something essential absent. He went to bed. He slept. He woke to someone screaming, servants running. Somewhere outside the house, in the direction of the family grave where Berenice had been buried that afternoon. He sat up in his bed and looked at his hands. His hands were dirty. The nails were broken and packed with dark earth. There were scratches on his arms he did not know where he had gotten. On the table beside his bed there was a small box he did not remember placing there. He opened it. Inside were 32 small white objects, very regular, very even, very white. He closed the box. He sat on the edge of his bed in the pale early morning light, and he understood something about himself, and about the place his mind went when it went away, and about what hands can do while a mind is somewhere else entirely. And the understanding was the worst thing he had ever felt, because he could not remember any of it. Not a single moment. Only the teeth in the box. Only the box on the table. Only his hands, dirty with grave earth, shaking now, shaking the way they had never shaken before, shaking with the weight of what had been done by someone who wore his face and lived in his body and went somewhere he had never been able to follow. He is still shaking. He may never stop. End of story 2. You are safe. You are exactly where you are. The dark around you is just dark. Nothing in it that was not there before. Breathe slowly. Let the weight of the story settle. Story 3 begins now. The last one, the longest, the strangest. Stay with us. He was born in that house, the house where this story takes place. Not just born there in the physical sense, though that too, but born there in every other sense as well. The house made him. The long, dark library with its thousands of books made him. The silence of the rooms made him. The particular quality of light that came through the narrow windows in the afternoon, gray and filtered and old-looking even on clear days, made him. His mother had died giving birth to him. He grew up knowing this fact the way you grow up knowing the color of your eyes or the name of the street you live on as simple information, not yet understanding the weight of it. He understood the weight of it later, after he was older, after he had read enough and thought enough to understand what it means to enter the world by taking someone else out of it. His father was a scholar and a quiet man who loved books more than people, and who provided for his son adequately but at a distance, the distance of a person who is not sure how to be close to someone who reminds them of someone they lost. He was kind at a distance. He was present at a distance. He gave his son the library and left him in it. And the library, which is perhaps the best and worst gift you can give a child who is already inclined toward living in his own mind, became everything. He read everything in it. Not quickly, not the way some people read, sliding over surfaces, slowly, going into things, following a thought from one book to another and then to a third, and then back to the first again, building structures of understanding that were elaborate and personal and sometimes had very little to do with what the books were actually saying and everything to do with what his particular mind made of them. This is not unusual for very intelligent people, but in him it was more extreme than in most. The ability to become completely absorbed in an idea, to follow it down past the point where other people would surface for air, was both his greatest strength and the thing that eventually, in the story he is about to finish telling you, became the mechanism of the worst thing he ever did. Berenice, his cousin, grew up in the same house, but she was outside while he was inside, in the sun while he was in the library, laughing with the servants and climbing the garden walls while he sat in the study and read. They were fond of each other in the distant way of people who share a home, but inhabit different versions of it. They did not speak often. They did not need to. She brought light into the rooms she moved through, and he sat in the rooms she had left and felt occasionally the warmth that light leaves behind. He watched her become ill. It happened over the course of a winter. The winter was cold and long, and the house was always cold. The particular cold of old stone buildings that take weeks to warm after summer and cool within days when autumn arrives. She had always been healthy, robustly and almost aggressively healthy, the kind of person whose physical vitality is one of their most noticeable qualities. And then one morning she came down to breakfast and something was different. He noticed it before she did. She did not notice it for several days. He said nothing because he did not know what to say. and because he was not sure he was seeing what he thought he was seeing, and because naming things sometimes makes them more real, and he was not ready for this to be more real. But it was real. It got more real every week. The brightness going out of her slowly, the energy retreating from the surface of her to somewhere deeper and less accessible, like water dropping in a well during a drought, still there but further away and harder to reach. The seizures started in the spring. He will not describe them in detail. He saw them and he will not describe them. What he will tell you is that they were frightening, not because of the physical reality of them, though that was frightening enough, but because of what happened to her in the minutes after each one. She would come back to herself slowly, like someone surfacing from very deep water, and for a few minutes she would not quite be Berenice. She would be something close to Berenice, a version of her that was not all the way present, that was still partially in wherever the seizures took her. And during those minutes, her face was very still, and her eyes were unfocused, and her mouth was slightly open. He saw her teeth during those minutes, white and even and very regular. He looked at them. He looked away. He looked at them again, and his mind, which did this to him, which grabbed hold of things and would not release them, grabbed hold. He tried to stop it. He is clear about this. He did not want to become obsessed with his cousin's teeth. He recognized what was happening in his own mind, and he tried to interrupt it, tried to redirect his attention, tried all the rational measures that rational people try when they become aware that their mind is beginning to go somewhere it should not. It did not work. The image was already in him, already growing, already crowding out other things the way weeds crowd out what you have planted quietly and then all at once. He began to avoid her. If he did not see her, he could not see her teeth. This worked for approximately 3 days. Then his mind denied the real image, began to produce it from memory with a clarity that was in some ways worse than the real thing. He could close his eyes in the library and see them more precisely than he had seen them with his eyes open. Every detail perfect, the slight variations in the surface, the specific way they caught the light. He tried reading. Reading had always been his refuge, his way out of his own mind and into someone else's. He would open a book and the book would take him and he would be gone from himself for hours. But when he opened a book now, the words would dissolve after a few sentences and he would find himself sitting with the open book in his hands, seeing teeth. He tried writing. He wrote about other things, anything, whatever came into his head, filling pages with words to keep his mind occupied. It worked sometimes. For a few minutes at a time, he could get enough distance from the obsession to breathe normally. And then the distance would close and he would look down at what he had written and find that the last 3 sentences were descriptions of teeth, written without his awareness, his hand producing what his mind was full of while he was trying to think about something else. It was a full occupation, a second existence running alongside his visible life. He went to meals. He spoke when spoken to. He was present in every necessary way. And the entire time, underneath, the obsession moved like something large and patient waiting for the surface to crack. Berenice died on a gray afternoon in November. He heard about it from the housekeeper. He received the information and nodded and said the appropriate things and went back to the library. He sat in his chair for a long time. He looked at the fire. The fire was ordinary. The room was ordinary. The afternoon was ordinary. Berenice was gone from the world. He felt in that moment something he had not expected to feel, something like relief. Not about her death, not that. He was genuinely sad about her death in the part of him that was still capable of being sad about things. But the obsession, he thought, now that she was gone, now that the source of it was gone, surely the obsession would also go. He breathed. He waited. He watched the fire. The teeth were still there. In his mind, clear and white and real, behind his eyes when he closed them, and alongside whatever he looked at when he opened them. She was gone, but they were not. He sat with this for a long time. He went to bed, and then he woke up to screaming. The earth under his fingernails was cold and dry, the specific dry cold of earth that has been dug recently and then exposed to the night air. He looked at his hands for a long time. He turned them over. He looked at the backs of them, and then the palms, and then the backs again. And he thought about what hands can do when the mind that is attached to them is somewhere else. When the mind has gone to that place, it goes that deep interior country with no windows, and has left the body to continue on its own. The box on the bedside table was small and plain, wood with a simple latch. He had not seen it before, or if he had not registered it. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment before he reached for it. He opened it. He counted. He closed it. He sat very still for a very long time, and the sound of the servants running outside came to him through the walls of the house, and the gray morning light came in through the window, and the ordinary world continued to exist in its ordinary way all around him, and inside him something that might have been the last functional piece of his former self looked at what was in the box and understood that whatever he was before this night, he was something different now. Not a bad person. He wants to be clear about this even now. He does not believe he is a bad person. He believes he is a person who has a mind that does things to him, that takes him places he does not choose to go and does things he would not choose to do. But the box is still there, on the table. He is looking at it right now. He cannot make himself put it somewhere he cannot see it. He is not sure why. He thinks he might be afraid that if he cannot see it, he might forget. He thinks he might be more afraid of forgetting than of anything else. Story 3. Ligeia. There are people you meet and then forget. There are people you meet and remember for a while and then forget. And then there are people who do not leave, who stay in you the way a sound stays in a room after the music has stopped, in the walls, in the air, in the space between things, who become so much a part of you that when they go, you do not know where they end and you begin. Ligeia was that kind of person. He cannot even tell you her last name. He has tried to remember it and cannot. He has looked for documents, letters, anything that had her full name written on it, and found nothing. He knows this sounds impossible. He knows it sounds like the kind of thing a person says when they are not being truthful. He is being truthful. Some things that are true sound impossible. That is one of the facts of being alive. She was tall and very thin, with dark hair that fell around her face like something from an old painting, and eyes that were the most remarkable eyes he had ever seen in a human face. He spent more time thinking about those eyes than about any other feature of any other person he had ever known. They were large, much larger than ordinary eyes, and very dark, and they had a quality to them that he could never quite put into words, a quality of depth, of looking at you from very far away, even when she was right in front of you, of seeing things he could not see. She knew everything. That is not an exaggeration, not the kind of thing you say about someone you love to make them sound more than they were. She genuinely knew more than any person he had ever met, more than any scholar, more than any teacher, in languages and sciences and philosophies and the kinds of knowledge that have no clean category, the knowledge of old and strange things that most people have never heard of and would not understand if they had. And she loved him. He never understood why. He was not her equal in any way that he could measure, but she loved him with a completeness and an intensity that sometimes frightened him, the way very large things sometimes frighten even when they are beautiful, the way standing at the edge of the ocean frightens even when you love the ocean. He loved her back with everything he had, and then she began to die. It came on slowly, the way certain illnesses do, not with a single dramatic moment, but with a series of small changes, so gradual that you convince yourself each one means nothing. She became thinner. The darkness under her eyes deepened. She moved more carefully, as if she had become aware of the fragility of the body she was in. But her mind only grew stronger as her body grew weaker, which he found both beautiful and terrible, the way the flame of a candle burns brightest just before it goes out. She began to talk about death, not with fear, with resistance, with a refusal that was almost frightening in its intensity. She told him that she would not accept it. She told him that the human will, if strong enough, could overcome even death itself. She told him this in the specific way she said everything, not as a wish or a hope, but as a statement of fact, as something she had considered carefully and concluded was true. He listened. He did not know what to say. He held her hand. She grew worse. She grew much worse. There were nights when he sat beside her and believed that each breath would be the last, and then she would breathe again and again, and then one night she did not. She left him a manuscript when she died, pages in her handwriting, a poem she had written. He read it in the days after her death, in the terrible quiet of the house without her, and the poem was about death and the will to overcome it, and it said at the end that the worm would not conquer, that even death was not the final word if the will was strong enough. He memorized it. He could not help memorizing it. Every word of it is still in him. He could not stay in the house where they had lived. Everything in it was her. Every room had her shape in it, the shape of her absence, which is worse than the shape of a person because absence has no edges. It fills everything equally. He moved, he traveled. He made the specific mistakes that people make when grief has removed the part of them that makes good decisions. He bought an old abbey in England, remote and strange, and he decorated it in a way that can only be described as the interior of a mind that is no longer entirely healthy. Rich, dark tapestries, heavy furniture, rooms with no natural light, lamps that burned gold and red and threw shadows that moved. He lived inside his grief the way some people build a house out of their worst feelings and then live in it permanently, choosing the suffering because it is at least a connection to what was lost. And then, because people do things that make no sense when they are not well, he got married again. Her name was Rowena. She was the opposite of Ligeia in every way. Fair where Ligeia had been dark, quiet where Ligeia had been profound, ordinary where Ligeia had been extraordinary. He did not love her. He is not sure he even liked her. He was kind to her in the way you are kind to someone you have made a commitment to and intend to honor, but the kindness was empty, a performance of feeling rather than feeling itself. She knew. Of course she knew. You always know when you are the person someone has settled for. They were not happy. The house was not a happy house. The rooms he had decorated in his grief were not rooms that produced happiness. They were rooms that produced exactly what they had been designed to produce, the heavy, oppressive weight of obsessive memory. Rowena became ill not long after they arrived. He should have been a better husband. He should have paid more attention. Instead, he spent his nights in the great decorated room, sitting alone, not quite sober, thinking about Ligeia, reading her poem, hearing her voice in his head, saying that the will could overcome death if it was strong enough. Rowena got sicker. One night he was sitting with her. She was in the great bed in the decorated room. She had been sick for days and was very weak, and the doctor had come and gone, and there was nothing more to be done except sit with her, and he was sitting with her in the low golden light of the lamps, and the room was very quiet. And he saw something. He is not sure even now whether it was real or whether it was the product of an unwell mind in an unwell house at the end of a very long period of grief. He is not sure, and he will tell you he is not sure because honesty requires it. but he saw it. A shadow in a part of the room where there was no object to cast a shadow, moving slowly, moving with an intention that shadows do not normally have. He watched it. He told himself he was imagining it. He watched it move to the bed where Rowena lay. And then Rowena's condition changed. She had been dying, clearly dying, the particular stillness and color and breathing of someone at the very end. And then something came back into her, some color, some movement, some quality of being present that had been absent for hours. He leaned forward. He called her name. She turned toward him. He looked at her eyes. They were dark. Not the pale eyes of Rowena. Dark eyes. Large, much larger than ordinary eyes, with a quality of depth, of looking at you from very far away, even when she was right in front of you. He said a name. Not Rowena's name. Ligeia's name. The figure in the bed sat up slowly. The fair hair of Rowena hung around the face. But the eyes that looked at him from beneath that fair hair were not Rowena's eyes. They were not. He knows what he saw. He knows how it sounds. He is telling you anyway because he has no other way of explaining what happened in that room, on that night, in that strange, dark house that he had built out of his grief and his obsession and his refusal to let go. She had said the will could overcome death. He had not believed her completely. He had loved the idea of it, but he had not believed it. He believes it now. He believes it because of those eyes. Dark, enormous, impossibly deep, looking at him from a face that should have had different eyes, and in them, something that recognized him. Something that had been very far away and had come back. Something that was not finished. Something that had never intended to be finished. He said her name again, very softly, and the eyes, those dark, impossible eyes, looked directly at him and did not look away. End of story 3. 3 stories, 3 nights. 3 men who could not let go of something and what happened to them because they could not. You have been in the dark for a long time now. Let it carry you the rest of the way. The stories are finished. The night is quiet. You are safe in the place you are in, whatever place that is, and the dark around you is just the ordinary dark of sleeping. The dark that has always been there. The dark that means rest is coming. Close your eyes if they are not already closed. Let your thoughts slow down. Let them become less sharp, less defined. Let them soften at the edges the way thoughts do when sleep is very close. You were a good listener tonight. We will be here again next time. Sleep well. End of Poe compilation total runtime. Estimate approximately 90 to 110 minutes at standard sleep narration pace. He is telling you this from memory, which means he is telling you it imperfectly, because memory is always imperfect, and the memory of Ligeia is more imperfect than most, because he has spent so much time inside it that he has worn it smooth in places, the way a stone wears smooth from being handled too much. He met her in a city he does not name, not because the city is a secret, but because it does not matter. Any city would have produced her, he thinks. She was the kind of person who would have found you regardless of where you were. The finding was not an accident. It felt, from the first moment, like something that had been arranged. She was sitting at a table in a library. Of course, she was sitting at a table in a library. He thinks sometimes that this is where she had always been, waiting in libraries for the right person to walk in, the person whose mind was shaped correctly to receive what she was, the way a particular lock will only turn for a particular key. He was that key. He understood this immediately, which is a strange thing to understand about yourself in the first moments of meeting someone. But he understood it. She was reading something that he could not see the title of from where he was standing, and she was making notes in the margin of a small notebook, and she had not looked up. And he stood in the doorway of the library and looked at her for long enough that she must have felt the looking, because she turned her head and found him immediately with those eyes. Those eyes. He has tried to describe them before and always fails. Not because they were indescribable, they were entirely describable in technical terms, large and dark and set wide in a face that was pale and still and precise as a painting. But the technical description misses the thing that mattered, which was what they did to you when they looked at you. They made you feel that you were being seen clearly and completely, the way very few people are ever truly seen, and that what was being seen was not found wanting. That was the thing, the absence of finding you wanting. He had spent his whole life being slightly found wanting by his father's distance and his schoolmates' incomprehension and the general mild disapproval of a world that does not quite know what to do with people like him. And those eyes looked at him and found nothing wanting at all. He walked across the library and sat down at her table and introduced himself, and she told him her name, and that was how it began. Their life together was unlike any life he has lived before or since. He is aware that people who have lost someone often say this, that the time with the person who is gone was uniquely good, better than anything that came after or before. And he is aware that memory is unreliable and grief makes it more so, inflating what was good and editing out what was not. He accounts for all of this. He makes allowance for all of it. And still, what he remembers is something he cannot account for with those adjustments. What he remembers is a quality of existing that he has not found elsewhere, a quality of being fully present in his own life, in a way that he was not before her and has not been since. She taught him. Not in the formal sense, not in the sense of lessons planned and delivered, but in the continuous sense, the ongoing and effortless sense of being with someone from whom knowledge flows naturally and constantly, the way warmth flows from a fire without the fire trying to warm you. She knew things about history and science and mathematics, and the strange old philosophies that have no home in the modern world, the ones that say strange things about the nature of matter and spirit and the border between the living and the dead. She was particularly interested in that border. He remembers conversations, long evening conversations by the fire or at the table or walking through the city streets after dark, in which she would talk about the nature of death with a specificity and a seriousness that made him slightly uncomfortable, and that he is now grateful for, because those conversations were what she was preparing him for, in her way, without his knowing that she was preparing him for anything. She believed that death was not a wall. She was explicit about this. She believed that death was more like a membrane, something that could be crossed if the force pushing against it was strong enough. She believed that the force required was will, not physical force, not any kind of external intervention, but the internal force of a mind that refuses to accept finality, that will not consent to ending. She talked about this the way she talked about everything, precisely and calmly, and as if she were discussing something she had thought about carefully and concluded was factually correct. Not a hope or a wish, but a conclusion drawn from evidence. He had listened. He had been interested in the abstract way one is interested in ideas that seem to exist at a comfortable distance from one's own life. He had not understood that she was not talking abstractly, that she was talking specifically, that she was, in her precise and serious way, telling him exactly what she intended to do. The illness came as a revelation, which is a strange way to experience someone you love becoming ill. But what it revealed was the intensity of what he had not previously known he could feel. The full depth of it only became clear to him when it was threatened, which is also not unusual, which is in fact one of the most ordinary human experiences there is, the understanding of value through the threat of loss. What is unusual is the scale of what he discovered. He discovered that she was everything, not metaphorically, literally, the specific architecture of his inner life, the entire structure of what mattered to him and why, had been rebuilt around her presence without his fully noticing while it was happening, the way you do not notice a building going up when you are inside it during construction. And now the building was her, and the prospect of her going was the prospect of the building going. He sat with her through the long, slow winter of her dying, and he held her hand, and he listened to her talk about will and about death and about the membrane between them, and he told himself he believed her, and he told her he believed her, and in some part of himself he did believe her. The part that loved her so completely that it was willing to take her at her word about anything. But in another part of himself he was doing what humans do when confronted with someone they love dying and the most sophisticated beliefs in the world about death not being final. He was grieving. Quietly, behind his expressions of belief and acceptance, he was already living inside the loss, already experiencing the future he was about to be in, the future without her. She died. He held her hand and felt the moment it happened, felt the change in the quality of what he was holding, felt the thing that leaves a body when the body stops, and he sat with her for a long time after, not because he believed she was still there, not because he could not accept what had happened, but because leaving felt like the beginning of a life he did not want to be living. And as long as he was still in that room, still holding her hand, he was still in the life before. The poem she left him began with a question and ended with a declaration. The declaration was that the worm would not win, that the angel of death would come for all things, but that the human will, if sufficient, if absolutely committed, if refusing down to its last atom to accept the ending, could outlast even that. He memorized it standing in the empty house on the day of her funeral, reading it over and over while the sounds of the burial came to him through the window from a distance, until every word was in him, until he could close his eyes and see the whole thing written inside his own eyelids. He was not sure he believed it. He was absolutely certain she had believed it. England was wet and cold, and the abbey he bought was damp and strange and suited him perfectly. He threw himself into decorating it with the energy of someone who has no other constructive outlet for a mind that will not rest, filling the rooms with heavy things, beautiful things, things that had weight and age and the specific gravity of objects that have been in many rooms over many years and carry the accumulation of all of them. The room he spent the most time on was the main bedroom. He did not examine why he was spending so much time on it. He did not ask himself what he intended to sleep in it. He simply worked, ordering tapestries and bringing in furniture and arranging and rearranging until the room was as close as he could get it to the place he was building in his mind, the place that was appropriate for what he was, a man who had lost what he had lost and could not let go. The tapestries moved when there was no wind. He noticed this early and decided not to think about it. The lamps he had placed burned in colors that were not quite the colors of ordinary fire. He noticed this and decided not to think about it. The room had a quality, after he had finished with it, of being very slightly more than a room, of having something in it beyond furniture and fabric and stone. He decided not to think about this either when Rowena came into his life, which she did through the mechanism of a social arrangement that he will not burden you with the details of. She came into a life that was not designed for her. The house was not designed for her. The room was not designed for her. The man she was marrying was not designed for her. He was designed, by this point, entirely for the specific shape of absence that Ligaya had left. And Rowena, who was real and present and had her own needs and her own fears and her own unhappiness, was simply the wrong shape to fill it. He treated her with courtesy. He treated her with the specific courtesy of someone who is being very careful not to be cruel, and knows that the carefulness itself is a kind of cruelty. She understood this. He could see that she understood it in the way she moved through the house, the way she looked at him across rooms, the way she had stopped trying to reach him through the courtesy and had accepted the courtesy as the ceiling of what was available. He felt sorry for her. He felt sorry for her in the abstract way he felt things by then, from a distance, through the membrane of his grief. When she began to be ill, he felt sorry for her, more concretely, because illness brought her closer to something he understood. He sat with her. He was present in the room, with her in ways he had not been present in the house with her. He brought her water. He adjusted the lamp so the light was gentler. He did what you do for someone you cannot love but can still take care of. And then the shadow moved, and her eyes changed. He is finished talking now. He does not have more words for what happened after the eyes changed, not because there are no more events, but because the words he would need do not exist in the language he has available. He can tell you facts. He can tell you that he said a name. He can tell you that the name was not Rowena's name. He can tell you that the eyes that looked back at him from the face with the wrong hair were not Rowena's eyes. He can tell you that they knew him. He can tell you that they were not afraid. He can tell you that in that moment, in the very specific light of that very specific room with its moving tapestries and its colored lamps, he understood that she had been right, about the will and about the membrane and about what sufficiently refuses to end. He can tell you that he was not afraid either. He was the opposite of afraid. He said her name in the dark room very softly, the way you say the name of something you thought was gone forever when it comes back. And she looked at him, and she did not look away. And outside the room the abbey was wet and cold and dark, and the English rain came down steadily on the old stones. And inside the room 2 people looked at each other across a distance that had seemed, for a time, to be the distance between the living and the dead, and found that the distance was smaller than anyone had told them it would be. Smaller, perhaps, than distance at all.